Welcome back to the Meeting Mastery podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Frampton, the CEO and co-founder of SalesQ, and we have a special guest with us here today. Been a head of sales 3 times and a sales leader much more than that, and now helping early stage companies with his own gig. Why don't you introduce yourself quickly, Jason?
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. So I've been in tech sales, SaaS sales, B2B primarily for 2 decades now. Started my career in New York City, working at some really early stage startups, and was fortunate to move into sales leadership, also in the startup world, and have always worked at these fast growth, hyper growth VC, PE backed companies, and seen a lot of good, bad, everything in between, and have had some exits, have had some catastrophic failures, and everything has led to where I am today, which is having founded my own company called Sympatheia Growth, where I work with startup founders and CEOs that are more early stage, less than $1 million in ARR, roughly. That's in that ballpark, that are looking to sort of get out of founder-led sales or have sales people, but they're sort of stuck. There isn't anything that's repeatable and scalable. So timing is really, I think, opportunistic for this, because there are a lot of startups that are struggling right now. I feel fortunate to be able to come in and be able to help them and drive impact, drive results pretty quickly. So yeah, it's exciting.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that. I think everybody that listens to this podcast regularly is going to know what my next question is based on what you were saying. Even reading like your LinkedIn profile before this and getting up to speed around what you're doing with your new consulting business. You mentioned in it that if you go the first time VP of sales route, that 70% of the time that ends up in failure. And I completely agree, right? Like, I think a lot of the time it's not the best route, but you've been a first-time VP of sales. I've been a first-time head of sales. We've both been through it and managed out okay. Curious, like, what are some of the things that result in that more epic failure emotion than the success side that you've seen? And like, yeah, what advice do you have for all the folks watching that are maybe on that journey to be their first VP of sales gig?
You hear about all the wins when people come back from Vegas and they made a ton of money at the blackjack table.
My bachelor party this weekend, we went to the casino, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
People don't brag about their losses. I've always loved being vulnerable and sharing my losses and failures as a way to kind of self-reflect and learn and grow, and also to help other people, potentially prevent other people from making the same mistakes. One of my favorite quotes is, "You win or you learn." So I never really looked at those as like true losses as much as it was learning opportunities. I remember this so vividly. I was in my late 20s, and there was a group of guys that I had sort of kind of come up with professionally, and a couple of guys were getting these VP sales titles and roles, and I was like, I have to keep up. I want to be a VP of sales no matter what. And I was interviewing for these opportunities, and I was like, I can do this. I've got a seat at the table. I can be a VP of sales. I didn't really scrutinize as much as I needed to. I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't poke holes. I was just so excited about the opportunity. And I remember having a conversation with an investor of a startup. This is, I want to say, like 2011 or 2012. He was actually interviewing me for one of his portfolio companies. I in my mind, I was like, I'm definitely the right person for this. And he's like, I can tell you all the reasons you're not. And then he gave me some really harsh feedback, which I always appreciate, as long as it's constructive and I could do something with it or whatever. He was like, yeah, unless you were the person that led a team, like you were a head of sales somewhere else, or you've got just such subject matter expertise that they have to hire you, you're not going to get this role, or a lot of like the top roles at the top startups that you are thinking that you can get. So you need to kind of go back and like earn your stripes a little bit more. And I was like, no, whatever. You don't know what you're talking about. I ended up taking a VP of sales role without putting it through that level of scrutiny. And within like 3 days of starting, I was like, this was a terrible decision. It was a bait and switch in that the CEO said that got all this revenue, got all these customers. None of that was true. There's no product market fit. I was sort of like, I'm going to try to make this work. And it was brutal. And this was early in my career. And I tried to write it out as long as I could. Ended up taking a step back in my career, or lateral in my career, and joining a company called Cvent, which was, one of the top technology companies in the DC area forever. And I learned a lot there. It was like my MBA, my sales and leadership MBA, and that positioned me to take on bigger roles moving forward. But I think the reason that a lot of people fail in that first role is they get so excited about, someone wants me to be a VP of sales, me. All right, I'm in, and I'm going to put the blinders on. I'm going to ignore like all the red flags here. Like I'm going for it. Like that's the number one problem. I think I've seen, and I've had this conversation so many times with so many young sales leaders, or it's just unrealistic expectations. Like it's as like a follow up to the red flag thing. Like you come in and it's your first time as a head of sales, and you're learning so many new things, so many new skills. It's a big jump, right? From being one of the people to being the person. Are you presenting to board members? Are you pitching to investors? Like the scrutiny, the stress is just on a different level. And a lot of times you come in and you have to learn this while also realizing that you've inherited like quite a mess, right? And you either have to fix and or build simultaneously while all this other stuff is going on, like while you're trying to learn it. So the statistic of 70% fail in their first year is actually from Jason Lemkin, who's one of the, one of the most well-known thought leaders in investing and in SaaS, one of the goats, if you will. And yeah, that doesn't mean 100% fail. 3 out of 10 will survive past 1 year. And I think now even more so with how chaotic the market is, I think it's even more dangerous to like jump into something. And fortunately, the way we met, obviously through Pavilion Revenue Collective, even before that, I was drawn to Revenue Collective back in the day. A lot of what Sam was saying early on of like, learn from my failures. Like Sam's like one of the most vulnerable people out there in terms of like his transparency, and like learn from all the mistakes I made. He always talks about how he got fired multiple times, but this is what I've learned, right? And that message is like, it really resonates. Like you don't have to have this bravado, no pun intended, to the other revenue community, but like you don't have to have this like facade of like, oh, I'm tough, I don't need help. Like, no, it's okay. Like there's a community of people that are helping each other, supporting each other, and like the ability to negotiate all these different things into your contract. Like the idea of that never even dawned on me until I started, until I joined Revenue Collective Pavilion. And I learned that like, no, this is a thing, and this is how you negotiate it. And this is going to protect you for when some of these inevitabilities like pop up. The more you can get out there and learn about, like, there are a lot of other people going through this, the more you could prevent, some of the mistakes that I have made and Sam has made and a lot of other people have made.
I have made.
Ryan has made. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
hear you. One of my favorite quotes is I think Tom Hanks said this, but I hope it's okay to mildly curse, but you learn more getting your ass kicked than kissed. And some people are super thoughtful and they'll ask questions and they'll do their research, and some people are like when you're a kid and like your mom's like, the stove is hot, don't touch the stove, and you're like, whatever, I'm gonna learn the hard way, and you touch the stove and you're like, oh, that was hot. So everybody learns differently, but yeah, fortunately there's a big community of people that have gone through these things that are always willing to share their scars.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that some of the biggest things, right, is you're typically moving from like an IC role, like an account executive or something, to a manager role internally. So you know exactly what you're getting into. You don't actually really need to be good at vetting out opportunities. But I would say the only person I know that has made the VP of sales move internally is Dan Wardle from Vidyard, who used to manage me. He's been there for like 13 years or something. Everybody else, myself and most people, there's already a VP of sales at the company, and you need to make that jump from like a director role to a VP role externally. And to your point, that's such an exciting moment in your career because that's what you've been working for. That's kind of like the pinnacle. I'm in the show now, to use like a sports analogy, and you forget to be like, hey, what's your gross margin? What is the board actually wanting you to achieve? What's your churn? What's your net retention? And don't just tell me over a casual conversation. Like, actually, like, send me the report. Can you give me a Salesforce login for a week? I just want to vet it out. And like, actually try to get like a consulting engagement for 2 weeks to like see if it's a fit. And it's like, you actually need to vet things out much more, because I think one of the reasons why like the consulting engagements work so well early on, like specifically what you're doing, has typically never been a sales leader. So they don't know what to look for when they hire a VP of sales. They don't know when they're ready, but they are told that they need to. So it's actually better, like, go find someone that's been there, done that, work with them, and then they can help you hire that more permanent VP of sales once you're ready for it. So that's my take on these things. But
I completely agree. And I also think that, LinkedIn has always sort of shrunk the world a lot, like made everybody a lot more connected in a professional sense, in a good way. I've always been a big fan of LinkedIn, and I still remember when, I was younger in my career and I started to like get hit up like nonstop by recruiters, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, everyone wants to talk to me, and I'm nobody. So I can imagine, some of the, sales leaders at, like, bigger companies, with more, much more impressive roles, much more impressive backgrounds were getting hit up like 10 times as much as I was. But even like the, 2 or 3 a week at one point, or at its peak, like multiple a day, where it was like crazy. I was like, this is amazing. Like, my head was like this big. I'm like, this is the coolest thing. So it was very distracting. Like, you always see like the bright, shiny objects. This is just my mantra, my way of doing things. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I know people that do this, and I know people that critique this, but I've always been like a 3 to 4 year, like move up if you're given an opportunity. And, I've always viewed it as sort of like you have a limited amount of time to maximize your earning potential, almost like an athlete, going back to sports. I as much as I love loyalty, and I'm super close with everybody that I've ever worked with, never burned bridges. Still very close to like my first sales manager from 2005 or 2006. The idea of loyalty, to like ride it out, where you have a guaranteed thing to like make twice as much at another opportunity, with another opportunity, where a more senior role. I've always been super, like, not just flattered, but super intrigued by those kinds of moves, which is why I've done that in my career. I remember, like, I'm not going to say his name, but there was a close friend of mine who I ended up becoming sort of like a pseudo mentor for, who had an opportunity to get promoted internally to be a sales director. Actually, he was a sales manager, had an opportunity to be a sales director. But he also had an opportunity to be a sales director at another company, and the comp at the other company was higher. It was like a super like hot startup, whatever. And he had been at this company where he was offered the internal promotion. He'd been there for a little while, so I think he was like super intrigued by making the move. And my advice to him was, if you're making that jump the first time, like, it's a big jump, and you have the opportunity right there in front of you internally, like, you may want to just ride that out, and learn, like, just learn in an environment that's a lot more welcoming. And I know this totally contradicts what I just said about jumping from place to place. I'm a little crazy, I guess. I don't know. I'm more.
I think it's about the context, though, too. Like, why bite off and need to learn double if you can earn more, learn one thing, than doing both?
Like, if you don't have a clear path to get to that role because someone else is there and they're just not, like, they're great, they're never leaving, whatever, and you have that opportunity, the same role at another company, that's a difficult decision to make at that point in some cases, like if you really like your company. But for me, if I feel like I'm ready for that next role and I want to capitalize and maximize my earning potential now, then I'm going to seriously consider that role at a new company versus staying put and just trying to, wait for something to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think one of the biggest reasons why people fail is to like close the loop on it is like they fail before they even start the VP gig, right? Like I think that
Yeah.
that's the big thing is like you need to vet out the opportunity, and it's something that you need to do eventually, and you can't just sit there waiting because there's always going to be the chance that you fuck it up. But you need to just stop, remember, like you still need to ask the questions. You're not getting an internal promotion typically. You need to really understand the business because you're actually going to be running that business.
Well, the other thing that's super complicated is that, the dynamic of like joining a new company, they may do things, probably going to do things completely different than what you've gotten used to and you're accustomed to at your last company in terms of just like reporting, even sometimes like CRM, like the tech stack they use, the way they handle contracts, like everything is totally different. So you've gotten really good at one thing and you don't really understand the full breadth of like what that role is going to require. So you're relearning everything. So like again, another shout for Sam and Pavilion. I'm just a fan. I've been a member for a while now, and CRO school, right, which was great because even though I thought I knew a lot, I'm learning from the best of the best instructors and people in my cohort that like have unbelievable experience, and I'm learning new things, and it allows you to understand the terminology and methodology beyond just what you're used to so that it applies to anywhere you go. And things like that have served me well personally because now as a consultant doing fractional type roles, it doesn't matter where I go, it doesn't matter what industry it is. I can quickly assess what's going on and come up with a solution or solutions to get things back on track or to build something that's going to work because I've got that all the context now, through like CRO school and through my experiences.
Yeah, one of the big things, like when I went through CRO school, is learning just even about like unit economics and like a really like fundamental way. Because if you're a VP, when you're in a board meeting and you're beside a VP of marketing or a VP of CS, you can tell who understands that stuff way more. And those are the ones that are having much clearer and easier conversations at the board level. Because often when you get fired as like a VP of sales or head of sales, it's the board that is encouraging the CEO to do it. Realistically, they're the ones with more experience to know what is a good VP versus a bad VP. The CEO is really going to rely on their recommendations, which is good and bad, but it's important to know.
Well, I mean, at this point, when you talk about getting to profitability or break even as quickly as possible, especially for startups, if you don't know what you're talking about, then you're an overpriced manager at that point, right? So at some point, either the board or the CEO is going to say, I can get you for half the cost because you're not bringing anything to the table other than you're an overpriced sales manager. It's a matter of like making sure that you're bringing value beyond just like, okay, like make more calls today, like whatever, like there's a lot of education and there are a ton of resources out there to really educate yourself.
Before we move on, just for people that want to level up on that, that's free, is go to the SaaS CFO. It's like a blog and it is incredible. Learn about like all of like CAC payback, LTV, like all that stuff. It goes in depth, but it's also pretty simple.
Yeah, the startup that I just joined was not tracking NRR, so we did a crash course last week. I'm like, this is how you calculate it. This is what's good. This is what's bad. This is things we need to focus on. There, like to Ryan's point, like so many resources out there, and a lot of them are free. And there's certain things that you just have to know in order to be able to hold your own and provide value wherever you go. And the other thing to consider is like if you're seriously looking at a like head of sales, VP sales, whatever type role right now, the market is flooded with really good people, like the most I've seen in a very long time, or the supply far is exceeding the demand at this point, right? Like you've got to understand that the things that maybe were working, a couple of years ago or even a year ago, it's not going to work now. So how are you able to stand out in an interview process when you are interviewing against people that are more experienced than you, or have done their homework, like really know what they're talking about? So if you're coming in thinking you can wing it, the whole like fake it till you make it thing does not work in this economy. This does not work in this market. Like go out there and level up. Like otherwise you are going to get passed over very quickly, or you will end up in like one of those situations that we were talking about early, where it's like you may get an offer, but there are probably a ton of red flags that you neglected to ask about, like you just ignore them entirely.
Yeah.
So
Which might be
level
why
up.
you're getting the offer, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
the other folks are
Exactly.
asking on it for a reason, right? Like you need to be vetting out. But no, I
You're
think
the last person standing because you haven't self-selected out. Yeah, good job.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So don't let this intimidate you from going for it. But all we're really saying is like just be thoughtful around it.
Oh
But
yeah.
just switching gears. I know we've been going for a little while as we were riffing on it with each other. But one thing that our audience really likes to hear from the sales leaders that come on the show is a top tip that they think all sellers should be really focusing on right now. Whether that's a manager leading an AE team and what they should be telling that AE team, or an individual AE. What's really top of mind for you for the organizations that you're advising right now?
I think there are a couple of things, but I even think back to Challenger Sale was like one of my favorite books when it first came out. And if you remember, the Challenger Sale was originated in a down economy, right? So the concept of the Challenger, that sales strategy of really being able to play the consultative role and like push back and give advice. I think that the days of just like being a demo jockey, just showing up, just feature dumping, pitching all over. Like the sales profession has done an okay job at trying to evolve past that. But now what I'm realizing is getting like very involved with coaching your prospect, the buyer, on how to like navigate and avoid landmines, and just like really being able to like, okay, like let's like, how is this going to fit into your process beyond just like all the sales methodologies? There's so many out there. Big fan of gap selling, for example, but like it's bigger than that. It's like, how is this going to fit? What is the process to get this done? Really understanding like the whole picture so that you are making it as easy as possible for the buyer to say yes. And sometimes that means being vulnerable too, and being like, we don't check this box. Like, and sometimes that's okay. Like you just want to get it out there in the open. Because getting ghosted right now is it's prevalent. It's always been prevalent, but I think the way you can combat that is to really learn as much as you can about your industry, about your prospects, become a subject matter expert as much as possible, at more than ever before, and really be able to advise your prospects, because there's a lot of noise. There are a lot of external factors that are distracting them. There are a lot of things that they're battling right now, internally, externally, and you want to make it as smooth and simple as possible. And you do that by really knowing your stuff. So don't go in at like 50%, 60% and think that you could do the bare minimum and be successful. Like you've got to level up and become a subject matter expert in order to be successful in this kind of a market.
Yeah. And sometimes, because I completely agree, sometimes when you tell sales reps that, they get really like, I wish it wasn't that hard right now. I wish it was like 3 years ago, but it is what it is. And I think when you look at the other way, where it's like, eventually it won't be like this, we will turn back. Think about how good of a seller you'll be then, right? Like this is an opportunity to really like refine your craft and get good, even when things are hard. And then it's just going to be a lot easier on you. I think the folks that started their career when times were where money was free and everything was easy, we're at a disadvantage now, right? And it's time to drive that advantage, because you had it easy, and I was one of those people, right? And now it's like you gotta reflect and be like, no, like maybe I'm not that good. Maybe I need to level up and get better.
Yeah. It's like Boston sports fans that grew up with like when all their teams were winning championships and that they go on like a little bit of a drought and they're like, oh, I'm like, stop it. Just everything is cyclical. Like there are going to be peaks and valleys, and the more like level you could be when there are those valleys, like what can you do to kind of maintain a level of performance? And the simple solution isn't always just work harder. It's just what are the things that you can be doing? And I'm big on like the concept of control the controllable. So what are the things that you could be doing? Do you know everything there is to know about your product? Do you know everything there is to know about your industry, about your buyers? Do you know everything there is to know? Because you probably don't. And the more educated you are, the more the buyers are going to trust you, and you're going to tip the scales in your favor in those conversations.
Yeah, no, 100%. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today. Now a quick word from the company powering the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, guys.
Watching call recordings on 2x speed is not only exhausting, but is also a waste of time for sales reps and leaders. With SalesQ, you can take concise notes with just a click of a button during your calls, so you can stay focused on the conversation. These notes are visible in real time, ensuring that you have all the critical information you need while it matters. After the call, the notes are automatically added to your CRM, providing your sales leader with all the information they need. Sales leaders no longer need to spend hours watching calls to identify if their coaching has been implemented. They can simply add feedback to SalesQ, and their sales team will be reminded in real time to execute on it. Sales reps can also submit evidence of their implementation of the feedback with just a click of a button, giving sales leaders an accurate picture of how the team was adopting their coaching. Want to help a specific rep improve? You can view calls where feedback was missed within your favorite call recording platform. Experience a more efficient way of managing your sales team with SalesQ.